The sun beat down merciless and unforgiving on the woman's face, pulling her from the depths of unconsciousness with its relentless heat. And when her eyes finally opened, she saw nothing but endless prairie grass stretching toward a horizon that seemed to mock her with its vastness. She tried to remember her name, her family, where she came from, anything at all, but her mind was a blank slate wiped clean by some force she could not comprehend. Pain throbbed at the back of her skull when she lifted her head, and her fingers found a matted tangle of blood in her dark hair. The dress she wore was torn and dusty, once fine fabric now ruined beyond repair, and her feet were bare and bleeding. She pushed herself up onto trembling legs and turned in a slow circle, searching for anything familiar, but the landscape offered no comfort and no answers. The prairie grass whispered secrets in a language she did not know, and the sky above was so blue it hurt to look at it. Panic began to claw at her throat as the reality of her situation settled over her like a shroud. She was alone in the middle of nowhere, with no memory of who she was or how she had come to be here. And the year was 1882, though she did not know it. The sound of hoofbeats reached her ears before she saw the rider, and instinct made her turn toward the noise. A man on a dark bay horse crested a small rise perhaps 100 yards away, and he pulled his mount to a stop when he spotted her. Even from a distance, she could see him stiffen in surprise, then urge his horse forward at a faster pace. She stood frozen, uncertain whether this stranger represented salvation or danger, but she had nowhere to run and no strength left to try. The cowboy dismounted while his horse was still moving, his boots hitting the ground with practiced ease. He was tall and lean, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath the brim of his hat and eyes that were an unusual shade of green. His face was tanned and weathered by sun and wind, and concern was written plainly across his features as he approached her slowly, hands held slightly away from his sides to show he meant no harm. "Madam," he said, his voice rough from disuse but gentle, "are you hurt?" She opened her mouth to answer, but the words would not come. She tried again, forcing sound past her lips. "I don't know. You are bleeding." He gestured toward her head, and she touched the wound again reflexively. "What happened? Were you thrown from a wagon? Are there others?" The questions came rapid fire, and she felt tears begin to well in her eyes. "I don't know," she whispered again. "I don't remember anything. I woke up here and I don't know who I am or how I got here." Something shifted in his expression, concern deepening into worry. He looked around as if expecting to find evidence of an accident or attack, but the prairie kept its secrets. "Nothing at all." She shook her head, and the movement made the world tilt dangerously. He caught her before she fell, strong hands steadying her by the elbows. "Easy now," he said. "When did you last eat or drink?" "I don't remember." The answer was becoming a refrain, and she hated how helpless it made her sound. He guided her to sit in the grass, then retrieved a canteen from his saddle. "Small sips," he instructed, crouching beside her and holding the canteen to her lips. The water was warm but tasted like life itself, and she had to force herself not to gulp it down. He watched her carefully, those green eyes assessing her condition with what seemed like genuine concern. "My name is Jacob Anderson," he said after she had drunk her fill. "I have a ranch about 5 miles west of here, between here and Denver, Colorado. I was out checking on some stray cattle when I spotted you. You are lucky I came this way." Lucky. The word felt strange given her circumstances, but she supposed it was true. What might have happened to her if he had not found her? She looked at him, this stranger who had introduced himself while she had nothing to offer in return, and felt a surge of desperation. "I cannot tell you my name because I do not know it," she said, her voice breaking. I do not know where I came from or if anyone is looking for me. I do not know anything." Jacob was quiet for a moment, studying her face with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable but somehow did not. "Well," he said finally, "we cannot very well leave you out here without a name. And you need medical attention for that head wound. Can you ride?" "I think so." She was not certain of anything, but the alternative was staying here, and that was unthinkable. He helped her to her feet and led her to his horse, a patient gelding that stood perfectly still while Jacob lifted her into the saddle. He swung up behind her, settling her against his chest with one arm around her waist to keep her steady. The contact should have alarmed her, but instead she felt only relief at having something solid to lean against. "The doctor in Denver is 2 days' ride from here," Jacob said as he turned his horse westward. "But I can tend to that wound well enough at the ranch. My mother taught me basic doctoring before she passed. You can stay with me until we figure out what happened to you and where you belong." The casual kindness in his offer made her throat tight with emotion. "Why would you help me? You do not know me." She felt rather than saw him shrug. "Out here, we help those who need it. It is how we survive. Besides, I cannot just leave a woman injured and alone on the prairie. What kind of man would that make me?" They rode in silence for a while, the gentle rhythm of the horse's gait lulling her toward sleep, despite her attempts to stay alert. The landscape gradually changed as they traveled, the endless prairie giving way to rolling hills dotted with scrub brush and the occasional stand of cottonwood trees. In the distance, she could see mountains rising like sentinels against the western sky. "I should call you something," Jacob said eventually, "unless you would prefer to wait and see if your memory returns." She had been thinking the same thing. "I do not want to be nameless." "But what if I choose wrong? What if someone is looking for me and I have taken another name?" "Then we will sort it out when the time comes. For now, you need something for people to call you." He was quiet, considering. "You have the most unusual eyes, gray like storm clouds over the mountains." "My mother used to tell me stories about a woman named Olivia who could read the weather in the clouds. Would that suit you, Olivia?" She turned the name over in her mind, testing how it felt. It was as good as any other, and there was something comforting about the story behind it. "Yes," she said softly. "Olivia, thank you." "Olivia it is, then, and you will need a surname. Winters, perhaps, for the color of your eyes and the fact that I found you with nothing but the clothes on your back like you weathered a storm, Olivia Winters." The name settled over her like a new skin, not quite fitting but serving its purpose. She nodded against his chest, feeling exhaustion pulling at her more insistently now. "That is fine. Sleep if you need to," Jacob said, his voice rumbling in his chest. "I will not let you fall." She wanted to protest, to stay awake and alert, but her body had other ideas. The warmth of his body behind hers, the steady rocking of the horse, and the trauma she had endured all conspired to drag her under. Her last conscious thought was that she was trusting this stranger completely, and she had no choice but to hope that trust was not misplaced. When Olivia woke again, the sun was lower in the sky, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. She was still on the horse, still held securely in Jacob's arm, and ahead of them she could see buildings taking shape in the distance. The ranch, she assumed, and the sight of it filled her with a mix of relief and apprehension. What would she find there? Who else would she have to explain herself to? "Good timing," Jacob said, noticing she had awakened. "We are almost home." As they drew closer, Olivia could make out the details of the ranch. A main house built of wood with a wide porch sat at the center, flanked by a large barn, several smaller outbuildings, and a network of corrals. Horses grazed in one pasture, and she could see cattle scattered across the hills beyond. It was a substantial operation, clearly the result of years of hard work. A dog came running to greet them as they rode into the yard, barking enthusiastically, until Jacob called out a sharp command that reduced the noise to excited whining. He dismounted first, then reached up to help Olivia down, his hand steady at her waist as he lowered her to the ground. Her legs felt unsteady after the long ride, and she swayed slightly before finding her balance. "Come inside," Jacob said, looping his horse's reins over a hitching post. "I will tend to your head, and then we can figure out something for you to eat." The interior of the house was simple but comfortable, clearly the home of a man living alone but making an effort to maintain it. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall and a sturdy table surrounded by chairs occupying the center. Doors led off to what she assumed were bedrooms, and everything was clean if not particularly decorated. Jacob pulled out a chair at the table and gestured for her to sit, then busied himself gathering supplies. He returned with a basin of water, clean cloth, and a small bottle of what smelled like whiskey. "This might sting," he warned, dampening the cloth and gently beginning to clean the blood from her hair. Olivia sat still, trying not to flinch as he worked. His hands were gentle despite their size and the calluses that spoke of hard manual labor. She found herself studying what she could see of his face from this angle, the concentration in his expression, the slight furrow between his brows as he examined her wound. "It is not as bad as it could be," he said after a few minutes. "A nasty bump and a cut, but the bleeding has mostly stopped. You will have a headache for a while, I expect, but I do not think your skull is fractured. Still, you should take it easy for the next few days." "I have nowhere else to be," Olivia said, trying for humor but hearing the sadness in her own voice. Jacob moved around to face her, leaning against the table with his arms crossed. "About that, you are welcome to stay here as long as you need. I have a spare room that was my parents' before my father passed last year. It is yours for now." The generosity overwhelmed her, and she felt tears threatening again. "I cannot impose on you like that. You do not even know me." "And you do not know yourself right now," he countered. "Look, Miss Winters, I understand this is a strange situation for both of us. But the fact is, you need help and I am in a position to offer it. We can ride into Denver in a few days when you are stronger and see if anyone there knows you or if there have been reports of missing persons. Until then, you will stay here where it is safe." She wanted to argue, but what alternative did she have? Wander back out onto the prairie and hope for the best? "Thank you," she said instead, the words feeling inadequate for what he was offering. "I will try not to be a burden." "You will earn your keep if it makes you feel better," Jacob said with a slight smile, the first she had seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the harsh lines and making him look younger. "I am sure we can find things for you to do around here once you are recovered." Over the next few days, a routine began to establish itself. Jacob was up before dawn to tend to his animals and handle the various tasks required to run a ranch, while Olivia rested and tried to coax her reluctant memory into revealing something, anything, about her past. She helped where she could, discovering that her hands seemed to know how to cook, even if her mind did not remember learning. And Jacob appeared grateful for the warm meals that greeted him when he came in from working. They talked during those meals, careful conversations that danced around the obvious questions neither could answer. Jacob told her about his parents, how they had come to Colorado in the 1860s and built this ranch from nothing, how his mother had died of fever when he was 19, and his father had followed her 3 years later after a fall from a horse. He spoke of the isolation of ranch life, the challenges of making a living from the land, and his hopes to expand his herd in the coming years. Olivia listened and tried to contribute what she could, but her past remained a locked door. She found herself watching Jacob when he was not looking, noticing the way he moved with unconscious grace, the gentleness in his hands when he handled the animals, the quiet competence with which he approached every task. He was a good man, she thought, and she was fortunate beyond measure that he had been the one to find her. On the 4th day after her arrival, Jacob announced at breakfast that he thought she was strong enough for the ride into Denver. "We will take the wagon," he said. "More comfortable for you, and I need to pick up some supplies anyway. We can visit the sheriff's office and see if anyone has reported a missing woman." The prospect filled Olivia with a confusing mix of hope and dread. Part of her desperately wanted answers, wanted to know who she was and where she belonged. But another part, a part she was reluctant to examine too closely, had begun to enjoy this simple life on the ranch with Jacob. What if learning her true identity meant leaving this place, and the man who had shown her such kindness? Denver was larger than Olivia had expected, a bustling town that had grown rapidly with the mining boom and the arrival of the railroad. The streets were crowded with wagons and horses, and the wooden sidewalks teemed with people going about their business. Jacob helped her down from the wagon in front of a building that bore a sign reading Sheriff's Office, and together they went inside. The sheriff was a middle-aged man with a thick mustache and tired eyes. He listened to their story with interest, his gaze sharp as it moved between Jacob and Olivia. "Cannot say I have heard about any missing women," he said when Jacob finished explaining. "But I will send some telegrams to neighboring towns, see if anyone is looking for someone matching her description. Dark hair, gray eyes, about 20 years old." He looked to Olivia for confirmation. "I think so," she said, though she could not be certain even of her age. "I do not know for sure." The sheriff nodded, making notes. "Could be you were traveling through and had some kind of accident. Stage robbery, maybe, or a wagon breakdown. Bandits have been active on some of the routes. You remember anything at all about how you got that head wound?" Olivia shook her head, frustration building. "Nothing. I woke up on the prairie with no memory of anything before that moment." "Well, I will do what I can," the sheriff promised. "Check back with me in a week or so. In the meantime, you are staying with Jacob here." "Yes," Jacob answered before Olivia could speak. "She is safe at my ranch." Something passed between the two men, some masculine understanding that Olivia could not quite interpret. The sheriff nodded slowly. "Good. Anderson is a decent man, Miss Winters. You are in good hands." They spent the rest of the day in Denver, with Jacob conducting his business while Olivia tried not to feel too overwhelmed by the crowds and noise. He took her to a general store and insisted on buying her some proper clothes to replace the ruined dress she had been wearing, as well as boots that actually fit her feet. She protested the expense, but he waved off her concerns. "You cannot wear my mother's old things forever," he said practically. "And you need boots if you are going to be any help around the ranch." The ride back to the ranch was quieter than the journey in had been. Olivia found herself thinking about what would happen if the sheriff's telegrams found her family, if someone came to claim her. Would she remember them? Would they be glad to have her back, or had she been running from something when she sustained her injury? The questions circled endlessly in her mind, offering no answers. "You are worried," Jacob observed as the ranch came into view. "I do not know what I want the outcome to be," Olivia admitted. "I should want to know who I am, where I belong, but what if I do not like the answers?" Jacob was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the reins. "Then I suppose you will deal with it when the time comes. No use borrowing trouble before it arrives." It was practical advice, and Olivia tried to take it to heart. As the days turned into weeks with no word from the sheriff, she found herself settling more deeply into life on the ranch. She learned to care for the chickens, to help with the garden that Jacob's mother had planted years ago and that he tried to maintain, to make bread and mend clothes and do the 100 small tasks that kept a household running. She also learned about Jacob himself, the way he hummed tunelessly when he thought no one was listening, his habit of checking the sky obsessively for weather changes, the surprising gentleness with which he handled injured animals. He had a good heart, she realized, and a loneliness that matched her own even if the sources were different. One evening, perhaps 6 weeks after Jacob had found her, they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. It had become a habit, this quiet time at the end of the day when the work was done, and they could simply exist without purpose or urgency. Olivia had begun to treasure these moments, the comfortable silence that required nothing from either of them. "I have been thinking," Jacob said, breaking the quiet. "If the sheriff does not find anything and your memory does not return, you might consider staying on here permanently." Olivia's heart gave a strange lurch in her chest. "What do you mean?" He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I mean exactly what I said. This ranch is too much for one person to manage properly. I could use the help, and you seem to have taken to the work well enough. We could make it official if you wanted. I could pay you wages for your labor." It was a practical proposal, framed in terms of mutual benefit, but Olivia thought she heard something else beneath the words. Or perhaps she was simply hoping she did, because somewhere along the way, her feelings for this quiet, kind cowboy had shifted into territory she had not anticipated. She found herself noticing things about him that had nothing to do with gratitude or security, and everything to do with the way her pulse quickened when he smiled, the warmth that flooded her when he said her name. "I would like that," she said carefully. "If you are certain I would not be in the way." "You are not in the way, Olivia." The sound of her name in his voice did things to her composure that she was not prepared for. "You have been a help, and if I am being honest, good company. It gets lonely out here by myself." They left it at that, but something had shifted between them. Olivia felt it in the days that followed, a new awareness that made her hyper-conscious of every interaction. She noticed the way Jacob's hand would sometimes brush hers when he handed her something, the way his gaze would linger on her face when he thought she was not looking. And she noticed her own reactions, the flutter in her stomach when he came in from working and smiled at her, the way she found excuses to be near him. 2 months after Olivia had appeared on the Prairie, they made another trip into Denver to check with the sheriff. The news was both disappointing and liberating in equal measure. "Nothing," the sheriff reported. "I sent telegrams all over Colorado and into the neighboring territories. No reports of missing women matching your description, no families searching for lost daughters or wives. It is like you appeared out of thin air." Olivia did not know how to feel. Part of her had held on to hope that someone somewhere was looking for her. But the larger part, if she was honest with herself, was relieved. Whatever life she had led before, whoever she had been, it was gone now. She could build something new, something of her own choosing. Jacob seemed to sense her conflicted emotions. He thanked the sheriff and guided Olivia back outside, his hand resting briefly on the small of her back in a gesture that felt both protective and intimate. "How are you holding up?" he asked once they were on the street. "I do not know," Olivia said honestly. "It is strange to be so completely untethered from the past, but at the same time there is a kind of freedom in it. I can be whoever I choose to be now." "And who do you choose to be?" She looked up at him, at this man who had given her not just a name but a place in the world. "I think I choose to be exactly who I am right now. Olivia Winters, who lives on a ranch in Colorado and is learning to make a life from nothing. Something in Jacob's expression softened. I like that choice. They were walking back toward where they had left the wagon when a commotion up ahead drew their attention. A man on horseback was riding too fast through the crowded street, scattering pedestrians and drawing shouts of anger. Jacob pulled Olivia close against a building to keep her out of the way, his arm around her shoulders in a protective gesture that made her breath catch. The rider thundered past, and Olivia caught a glimpse of his face, twisted with some strong emotion she could not identify. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in her mind. Not a memory exactly, but a feeling, a sense of recognition that was gone as quickly as it had come. She gasped, and Jacob looked down at her with concern. "What is it? Did you remember something?" "I do not know. Maybe." For just a second, that man seemed familiar, but I cannot grasp it. It is like trying to catch smoke. Frustration made her voice sharp. Jacob's arm tightened around her briefly before he released her. "Do not force it. If the memories are going to return, they will come in their own time." But the moment had unsettled Olivia, reminding her that her past was out there somewhere, a shadow that could intrude on the life she was building at any moment. She was quiet on the ride back to the ranch, lost in thoughts she could not fully articulate. That night, she dreamed for the first time since waking on the prairie. Fragmented images flickered through her sleeping mind, voices she did not recognize, faces that swam in and out of focus. She woke with a gasp, her heart pounding, and found Jacob standing in the doorway of her room with a lamp in his hand. "I heard you cry out," he said, concern evident in his voice. "Are you all right?" Olivia pushed herself up to sitting, trying to calm her racing pulse. "A dream. Or maybe a memory. I cannot tell which." Jacob hesitated in the doorway, clearly uncertain about the propriety of being in her room but unwilling to leave her distressed. "Do you want to talk about it?" She shook her head. "I cannot remember now that I am awake. Just feelings, mostly. Fear, I think, and sadness." He stood there a moment longer, then seemed to come to a decision. He set the lamp on the small table beside her bed and sat down in the chair by the window, far enough away to be respectful but close enough that she could see his face in the lamplight. "I will stay until you fall back asleep," he said. "If that would help." It should not have been appropriate, having a man in her bedroom in the middle of the night, but Olivia found she did not care about propriety at that moment. She was grateful for his presence, for the solid reality of him anchoring her against the uncertainty of her fragmentary dreams. "Thank you," she whispered. She lay back down, and Jacob began to talk in a low, soothing voice. He told her stories about the ranch, about his childhood, about his mother's laughter and his father's stern but loving presence. His voice washed over her like a balm, and gradually, Olivia felt herself relaxing back toward sleep. When she woke in the morning, Jacob was gone, but the lamp still sat on her bedside table, and she could smell coffee brewing in the kitchen. Something warm and tender unfurled in her chest at the evidence of his care, and she acknowledged to herself what she had been trying to ignore for weeks now. She was falling in love with Jacob Anderson. The realization should have frightened her, given how little she knew about herself and her past. But instead, it felt right in a way that nothing else had since she woke on the prairie. Whatever had come before, this moment, this feeling was real and true and hers. Over the following weeks, Olivia became bolder in examining her feelings and in watching for signs that Jacob might return them. She was almost certain he did, reading it in the way he looked at her, the care he took with her comfort, the excuses he found to be near her. But neither of them spoke of it, perhaps both afraid of disrupting the careful balance they had achieved. The turning point came on a warm afternoon in early September. Olivia had ridden out to bring Jacob lunch where he was working on mending fence in the far pasture. She had learned to ride in the weeks since her arrival, though she could not say if the skill was something relearned or newly acquired. Jacob had taught her with patience, and she had discovered a love for the freedom of being on horseback. She found him working shirtless in the heat, his torso glistening with sweat as he dug a new post hole. Something about the sight made her mouth go dry, an awareness of him as a man rather than just her rescuer and friend suddenly overwhelming. He looked up as she approached and broke into a grin that did nothing to help her composure. "You are a sight for sore eyes," he said, wiping his forehead with his arm. "And please tell me that basket contains something to eat because I am starving." Olivia dismounted and brought him the basket, trying not to stare as he reached for the shirt he had draped over a fence post and shrugged it on. They sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree, and Jacob ate with the single-minded focus of a man who had been working hard for hours. Olivia watched him, feeling something build in her chest that demanded release. "Jacob," she said when he had finished eating and was leaning back against the tree trunk with his eyes closed. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you really offer to let me stay?" "I mean, I know you said you needed help and it gets lonely, but that seems like an excuse more than a reason." He opened his eyes and looked at her, and Olivia saw something unguarded in his expression that made her breath catch. "Do you really want to know?" "Yes." Jacob was quiet for a long moment, as if gathering his thoughts or his courage. "From the moment I saw you standing there on the prairie, you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen," he said finally. "Even hurt and scared and covered in dust, there was something about you that reached inside me and took hold. I told myself I was just doing the right thing, helping someone in need, but the truth is I wanted you to stay from the very beginning. I wanted the chance to know you, to see if what I felt in that first moment might grow into something more." Olivia's heart was beating so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "And has it grown into something more?" "Every single day," Jacob said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know I have no right to feel this way about you. You do not even know who you are or where you came from. You might have a husband or a family somewhere looking for you. But I cannot help what I feel, Olivia. I am in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest and terrifying. Olivia felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. "I do not have a husband," she said with certainty. "I do not know how I know that, but I do. And I do not care about the life I had before because this life, here with you, is the one I choose. I love you too, Jacob." He moved then, reaching for her with hands that trembled slightly as they cupped her face. "Are you certain?" he asked, his forehead resting against hers. "Because once we start down this road, I will not want to let you go." "I am certain," Olivia whispered. "I have never been more certain of anything." Jacob kissed her then, gentle at first and then with growing passion as weeks of restrained longing finally found release. Olivia kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his shirt as she poured everything she felt into the contact. It felt like coming home, like finding something she had not known she was searching for. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jacob laughed shakily. "I have wanted to do that for so long." "Then you should do it again," Olivia said, and he did, kissing her until they were both dizzy with it. They rode back to the ranch together later that afternoon, Jacob on his horse and Olivia on hers, but their hands kept reaching for each other across the space between them. Everything felt different now that the truth was out in the open, charged with possibility and promise. That evening, sitting on the porch as the sun set, Jacob took Olivia's hand in his. "I want to do this properly," he said. "I want to marry you, Olivia Winters. I want you to be my wife and build a life with me here on this ranch." I know it is fast, and I know there are still unknowns about your past, but I do not care. Will you marry me? Olivia felt joy bubble up inside her, pure and uncomplicated. Yes, she said, laughing through happy tears. Yes, I will marry you. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony in Denver, with the sheriff and his wife serving as witnesses. Olivia wore a simple blue dress that Jacob had bought for her, and she carried wildflowers that she had picked that morning. Jacob wore his best suit, and when he looked at her as she walked toward him, the love in his eyes took her breath away. The preacher spoke the words that bound them together, and when Jacob kissed her as his wife, Olivia felt the last pieces of her new life clicking into place. Whatever she had been before did not matter. She was Olivia Anderson now, and she had never been happier. Their wedding night was a revelation of tenderness and passion, Jacob worshiping her body with a reverence that made her weep with the beauty of it. He was gentle with her, patient, making sure she felt safe and cherished with every touch. Afterward, lying in his arms in the bed that was now theirs, Olivia felt complete in a way she could not have imagined when she woke on that prairie months ago. I love you, Jacob murmured against her hair. Thank you for choosing me, for choosing this life. Thank you for finding me, Olivia whispered back. Thank you for giving me a name and a home and a reason to stop searching for what came before. Life on the ranch took on a new rhythm after their marriage. They worked side by side during the day, building the operation and dreaming of the future, and at night they explored the depths of their love for each other. Olivia discovered that her body knew things her mind had forgotten, skills and knowledge that surfaced when needed. She could sew and cook and garden, could read and write and do basic arithmetic. These abilities suggested she had come from some level of education and comfort, but the details remained frustratingly out of reach. Winter came to Colorado with snow that transformed the ranch into a pristine wonderland. Jacob taught Olivia how to care for the animals in the harsh weather, and they spent long evenings by the fire, talking and reading and simply being together. It was during one of these quiet nights in January that Olivia realized her monthly courses had not come in some time. She waited another week to be certain before telling Jacob, choosing a moment when they were alone in the kitchen after dinner. I think I might be with child, she said, watching his face carefully for his reaction. Jacob's eyes went wide, and then a grin split his face. He let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. Are you certain? He asked when he finally set her down. As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor, but all the signs are there. He pulled her close, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. A baby, he said wonderingly. Our baby. Are you happy? Olivia asked, though she could see the answer written plainly on his face. I am beyond happy, Jacob said. You have given me everything, Olivia. A partner, a companion, a love I never thought I would find, and now a child. I am the most blessed man alive. The pregnancy progressed without complications, though Olivia suffered from morning sickness in the early months that left her weak and miserable. Jacob was attentive and patient, bringing her crackers and tea, holding her hair when she was sick, and never complaining about the extra work he had to take on when she was too exhausted to help. As Olivia's belly grew with their child, something else began to happen. Small flashes of memory started to surface, fragmentary and disjointed but undeniably real. She saw a woman's face that she somehow knew was her mother, heard a man's voice calling her by a name that was not Olivia. The memories were painful, tinged with sorrow and fear, and she did not share them with Jacob at first, unsure what they meant or whether they changed anything. But one night, when she was about 6 months along and feeling the baby move strongly inside her, a more complete memory broke through. She was sitting at the dinner table with Jacob, and he said something that made her laugh, and suddenly she was somewhere else entirely. A different table, a different man, and that man was raising his hand to strike her. She gasped and jerked back, her hand flying to her cheek reflexively. Jacob was on his feet instantly, concern flooding his face. "What is it? What is wrong? Is it the baby?" Olivia shook her head, trying to calm her racing heart. "A memory," she managed. "A real one, not just fragments." He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Tell me." She did, haltingly describing what she had seen. "I think I was married before," she said, her voice shaking. "I think I was running away from someone who hurt me. That is how I ended up on the prairie." Jacob's expression darkened with anger, but not at her. "Did you remember anything else? A name or a place?" "No, just that moment, that feeling of fear." "Oh, Jacob, what if he is still looking for me? What if he finds us?" He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "Then I will deal with it," he said fiercely. "You are my wife now, legally and in the eyes of God. Whatever came before does not matter. I will protect you and our child, I promise you that." His certainty helped calm her fears, but the memory had shaken Olivia badly. Over the next few days, more pieces of her past filtered through. She remembered a name, though she did not know if it was hers or someone else's. She remembered a town that might have been in Kansas or Nebraska. She remembered fear and pain and the desperate need to escape. Finally, she told Jacob everything, laying out all the fragments and letting him help her try to piece them together. "I think my real name might have been Ophelia," she said. "And I think I was married to a man who hurt me badly. I must have run, taken a horse or gotten on a stage, and somewhere along the way, I had an accident that left me with the head injury. That is why no one was looking for me. He probably told everyone I ran off and was not worth finding." Jacob listened carefully, his jaw tight with suppressed anger at what she had endured. "You do not have to be that person anymore," he said when she finished. "You are Olivia Anderson, my wife and the mother of my child. That other life, that other name, it is dead and buried as far as I am concerned. But what if he finds me? What if someone recognizes me? Then we will face it together," Jacob said firmly. "But I do not think that will happen. You said yourself you think the town was in Kansas or Nebraska. That is a long way from here, and you look different now than you probably did then. You are healthy and happy and glowing with pregnancy. And most importantly, you have me standing between you and anyone who might try to hurt you." His words gave Olivia strength, and she tried to put her fears aside. The memories continued to come, but she stopped fighting them, letting them surface and then releasing them like leaves on a stream. That life was over. This was her life now. In late August of 1883, just over a year after Jacob had found her on the prairie, Olivia went into labor. It was hard and painful and seemed to go on forever, but Jacob stayed with her throughout, holding her hand and wiping her brow and telling her how strong she was, how much he loved her. Finally, as the sun was setting, their son came into the world with a lusty cry that made them both laugh through their tears. "A boy," Jacob said wonderingly, holding the tiny red-faced infant with a gentleness that belied his rough hands. "We have a son, Olivia." She was exhausted but had never felt more triumphant. "What should we name him?" she asked. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had not settled on anything definite. Jacob looked down at the baby, considering. "What about James, after my father, James Anderson?" "James," Olivia repeated, testing the sound of it. "Yes, I like that. James Anderson." Becoming parents changed them both in ways they had not anticipated. Jacob was a devoted father, spending every moment he could spare from the ranch work with his son, marveling at every small development. Olivia discovered a fierceness in herself when it came to protecting her child, a determination that nothing and no one would ever hurt him the way she had been hurt in her previous life. The months passed in a blur of sleepless nights and small joys. James grew from a tiny infant into a robust baby with his father's green eyes and his mother's dark hair. The ranch prospered as well, with Jacob making good on his plans to expand the herd. They hired a young man named Tom to help with the work, giving Jacob more time to spend with his family. It was on a warm day in May of 1884, when James was 9 months old, that Olivia's past finally caught up with her. She was in the garden with the baby when she heard unfamiliar voices from the direction of the house. Something in the tone made her uneasy, and she picked up James and hurried around to the front. 2 men sat on horses in the yard, talking to Jacob. One was the sheriff from Denver, and the other was a stranger, a thin man with cold eyes and a cruel mouth. Olivia stopped short when she saw him, recognition slamming into her with physical force. This was the man from her memories, the one who had hurt her. The stranger's gaze found her, and his eyes widened. "Ophelia," he said, his voice sending chills down her spine. "There you are. I have been looking everywhere for you." Jacob turned, and the expression on his face was thunderous. He stepped between Olivia and the stranger, his body language protective and threatening in equal measure. "I do not know who Ophelia is," he said coldly. "This is my wife, Olivia Anderson." The stranger laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Is that what she told you? That is my wife, and she ran away from me almost 2 years ago. I have every legal right to take her back." The sheriff looked uncomfortable, his gaze moving between the parties. "Mr. Anderson, is this true? Is this woman your wife?" "Yes," Jacob said without hesitation. "We were married in Denver in September of 1882. I have the license to prove it." "He married me under false pretenses," the stranger, whose name Olivia suddenly remembered was Cyrus Bennett, spat. "She was already married to me." "That makes her marriage to you invalid." Olivia found her voice, though it shook. "You beat me," she said, holding James tighter against her. "You hurt me so badly that I had to run for my life. I would rather die than go back to you." Cyrus's face twisted with anger. "You are my wife, and you will do as I say. The law is on my side." The sheriff held up a hand. "Now hold on. Mr. Bennett, do you have proof of your marriage to this woman?" "Of course I do." Cyrus reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document, handing it to the sheriff. "Married in Omaha, Nebraska, in 1881. You can see her signature right there." The sheriff examined the document, and Olivia's heart sank. She could see it was legitimate, could see the name Ophelia written in what she somehow knew was her own handwriting. The sheriff looked at her with sympathy. "I am sorry, Mrs. Anderson, but this appears to be a legal marriage certificate predating yours. That means your marriage to Mr. Anderson is not valid under the law." "No," Jacob said flatly. "Absolutely not. She is not going anywhere with this man." Cyrus's hand moved to his hip, where a gun rested in its holster. "I have the law on my side, Cowboy. You want to make this ugly?" Tension crackled in the air, and Olivia could see Jacob calculating his options. She stepped forward, placing herself slightly in front of her husband. "Wait," she said. "Jacob is right that I am his wife, but Mr. Bennett is also right that I was married to him first, so we have a legal problem that needs to be sorted out properly." The sheriff nodded, looking relieved. "That is sensible, madam. I think this needs to go before a judge." "Fine," Cyrus said, "but in the meantime she comes with me. She is still legally my wife." "She stays here," Jacob said, his voice like iron, "where I know she will be safe. Sheriff, you can see she has a child." "Are you really going to separate a baby from his mother based on a marriage certificate that might not even be valid anymore given the circumstances?" The sheriff looked torn. clearly not wanting to be in the middle of this situation. What circumstances? Abandonment, Olivia said, the word coming to her from somewhere. If a husband abandons his wife or fails to provide for her, the marriage can be dissolved. I ran away because he beat me, and he made no effort to provide for me or protect me. Surely that constitutes abandonment. Cyrus's face went red with rage. You ran away from me. I did not abandon you. You drove me away through your violence, Olivia countered, surprised by her own boldness. I had to flee for my safety. That is abandonment by any reasonable definition. The sheriff rubbed his face, clearly out of his depth. Look, this is beyond my authority to decide, but I agree that separating a mother from her infant is not something I am willing to do. Mrs. Anderson or Mrs. Bennett or whoever you are, you can stay here for now. But this matter needs to go before Judge Harrison in Denver as soon as possible. Can everyone agree to that? Jacob nodded tersely. Cyrus looked like he wanted to argue, but after a long moment he gave a sharp nod. Fine, but I will be watching. If she tries to run again, I will know. She is not going anywhere, Jacob said. This is her home. After the two men left, Jacob pulled Olivia and James into his arms, holding them so tightly it almost hurt. I am not going to let him take you, he said fiercely. I do not care what the law says. You are mine, and James is mine, and we are a family. What are we going to do? Olivia asked, fear making her voice small. We are going to fight, Jacob said. We are going to go before that judge and tell him the truth about what happened, about why you ran, and we are going to prove that your marriage to that monster should be dissolved. And if the law will not help us, then we will find another way. Over the next 2 weeks, they prepared for their day in court. Jacob hired a lawyer, a sharp young man from Denver named Peter Collins, who specialized in complicated domestic cases. Olivia told him everything she could remember about her marriage to Cyrus, the beatings, the fear, the desperate flight that had ended in her injury and memory loss. The problem is we need proof, Peter said after hearing her story. Testimony is valuable, but if we can find witnesses who saw him abuse you, or medical records showing your injuries, it will strengthen our case considerably. But Olivia had no proof. Her memories were still fragmented, and she had no idea if anyone in Omaha would even remember her or be willing to testify against Cyrus. They seemed to be at an impasse until the sheriff mentioned that he had made some inquiries in Nebraska and found some interesting information. Seems Mr. Bennett has quite a reputation in Omaha, he told them. Several people mentioned that his first wife disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Some folks thought he might have killed her, but nothing was ever proven. And there were rumors about him beating his second wife, which would be you, madam. It was not concrete evidence, but it was something. Peter worked tirelessly to gather affidavits from people in Omaha who were willing to speak about Cyrus's character, and to build a case that Olivia's flight had been justified, and that her marriage to him should be dissolved on grounds of cruelty and abandonment. The hearing was set for June 15, 1884. Olivia and Jacob rode into Denver the day before, leaving James in the care of Tom's wife, Mary, who had become a good friend to Olivia. Olivia was terrified, not just of losing the case but of having to see Cyrus again, to face the man who had caused her so much pain. Judge Harrison was an older man with a stern face but kind eyes. He listened carefully as both sides presented their cases. Cyrus's lawyer argued that Olivia was legally his wife and had abandoned him without cause, and that her subsequent marriage was invalid. Peter countered with the affidavits attesting to Cyrus's violent nature, with Olivia's testimony about the abuse she had suffered, and with the argument that she had been justified in fleeing, and that the marriage should be dissolved. Olivia took the stand and told her story, her voice shaking but steady as she described the beatings, the fear, the final desperate escape. She could feel Cyrus's eyes on her the whole time, burning with hatred, but she did not look at him. She kept her gaze fixed on Jacob, who sat in the front row giving her strength just by being there. When she finished, the judge asked Cyrus if he disputed her account. He stood and claimed that she was lying, that he had never raised a hand to her, that she had run away with another man. But when Peter presented the affidavits from Omaha, including a statement from a doctor who had treated Olivia for broken ribs and a black eye, Cyrus's story began to crumble. The judge took a long time deliberating, reviewing all the evidence and testimony. Finally, he spoke. "This is a complicated case," he said. "On the one hand, there is clear evidence of a legal marriage between Mrs. Bennet and Mr. Bennet in 1881. On the other hand, there is equally clear evidence that Mr. Bennet engaged in a pattern of violent abuse that drove his wife to flee for her safety." He paused, looking directly at Cyrus. "Mr. Bennet, I find your testimony unconvincing in light of the evidence presented. The affidavits from Omaha paint a picture of a man with a violent temper and a history of harming women. I believe Mrs. Bennet's account of the abuse she suffered at your hands." Hope flared in Olivia's chest, but she forced herself to remain still and listen. "However," the judge continued, "I must also consider the legal realities. Mrs. Bennet did enter into a lawful marriage with you, and under the law that marriage still exists unless formally dissolved. But I am persuaded by the argument that your cruelty and the danger you posed constitutes abandonment, as you failed in your most basic duty to protect and provide for your wife." He turned to Olivia. "Mrs. Bennet, I am granting you a divorce from Mr. Bennet on the grounds of cruelty and abandonment. The marriage is hereby dissolved, effective immediately." Relief flooded through Olivia so powerfully that she swayed in her seat. Jacob was there instantly, his arm around her, holding her steady. But the judge was not finished. "As for your marriage to Mr. Anderson, that is a more complicated matter. Technically, you entered into that union while still legally married to Mr. Bennet, which would make it invalid. However, given that you were suffering from complete memory loss at the time and had no knowledge of your previous marriage, and given that the first marriage has now been dissolved, I see no reason why your current marriage should not be recognized as valid going forward." He looked at both Olivia and Jacob. "I am ruling that your marriage to Mr. Anderson, while technically invalid at its inception, is now legitimate and binding. You are free to go and live your lives together without interference." Olivia could not help the sob that escaped her. Jacob pulled her into his arms and she clung to him, crying tears of relief and joy. They were safe. They were legal. They were a family, and no one could take that away from them now. Cyrus tried to protest, but the judge silenced him with a sharp look. "Mr. Bennet, you have no further claim on this woman. If you attempt to contact her or harass her in any way, I will have you arrested. Do I make myself clear?" Cyrus's face was purple with rage, but he gave a jerky nod. He stormed out of the courtroom, and Olivia felt a weight lift from her shoulders. He was gone. Her past was finally, truly behind her. The ride back to the ranch was joyful, both of them giddy with relief and the knowledge that they were safe. James greeted them with delighted babbling, and Olivia held her son close, breathing in his sweet baby smell and feeling grateful beyond words for the life she had been given. Life returned to normal after the hearing, or as normal as life on a ranch could be. Jacob continued to build the operation, and Olivia threw herself into making their house a true home. She planted flowers around the porch, sewed curtains for the windows, and filled the rooms with warmth and love. James grew into a lively toddler, full of energy and curiosity. He followed his father everywhere, imitating Jacob's walk and his mannerisms, and Jacob was endlessly patient with his son's questions and explorations. Watching them together filled Olivia with a contentment she had never imagined possible. In the fall of 1885, Olivia discovered she was pregnant again. Jacob was overjoyed, and James, now 2 years old, was told he would be a big brother. He seemed fascinated by Olivia's growing belly, often patting it gently and talking to the baby inside. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Olivia was not carrying the weight of fear and uncertainty alongside the child. She bloomed with health, and Jacob joked that she had never looked more beautiful. In April of 1886, she gave birth to a daughter, a tiny perfect girl with rosebud lips and wispy blonde hair that surprised them both given their dark coloring. "She must take after my mother," Jacob said, cradling his daughter with the same tender care he had shown James. "She was blonde when she was young. What should we name her?" Olivia had been thinking about this. "What about a leaner? After your mother, we could call her Ellie." Jacob's eyes grew suspiciously bright. "Eleanor Anderson, Ellie. Yes, that is perfect." With 2 young children, the ranch was livelier and more chaotic than ever. James was a devoted big brother, always wanting to help with Ellie, though his help was sometimes more hindrance. But Olivia would not have traded the noise and mess for anything. This was her family, her life, everything she had never known she wanted. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and Olivia and Jacob's love deepened with time and shared experiences. They weathered hard winters and dry summers, celebrated successes, and supported each other through setbacks. They were partners in every sense of the word, building something together that was greater than either of them alone. James showed an early aptitude for working with the animals, and by the time he was 8, he was a real help to his father on the ranch. Ellie was quieter, more thoughtful, with a love of books that Olivia encouraged by teaching her to read at an early age. They were different children, but both were loved fiercely and equally. In 1890, Olivia found herself pregnant for a 3rd time, much to everyone's surprise. She was 32 years old now, older than she had been with the first 2, and the pregnancy was harder. But in February of 1891, she gave birth to another son, whom they named Jonathan. He was a serious baby, watchful and quiet, and he completed their family in a way that felt exactly right. Jacob was 42 now, his dark hair touched with gray at the temples, but he was still strong and vital. He had built the ranch into one of the most successful operations in the region, employing several hands and managing a substantial herd. But he never lost sight of what was most important, always making time for his wife and children no matter how busy he was. One evening, when Jonathan was about 6 months old and sleeping peacefully in his cradle while James and Ellie played quietly nearby, Olivia and Jacob sat on the porch watching the sunset. It was a scene that had repeated itself countless times over the years, but it never lost its power to move her. "You ever think about that day I found you?" Jacob asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Sometimes," Olivia admitted, "though it feels like a lifetime ago." "Like that was a different person." "In a way it was," Jacob said. "You were Ophelia then, running from a nightmare. Now you are Olivia, my wife and the mother of my children. You have built a beautiful life from the ashes of that old one." Olivia leaned into him, content. "We have built it together. I could not have done it without you. You gave me everything, Jacob. A name, a home, a family, a reason to live. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." "You saved me too," Jacob said quietly. I was lonely and adrift before you came into my life. You gave me purpose and love and a future worth working for. We saved each other." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Inside the house, Olivia could hear the children's laughter, the sound of Jonathan beginning to fuss. This was her life now, full and rich and more than she had ever dared to dream. The years continued to unfold, bringing new challenges and joys. James grew into a fine young man, taking over more and more of the ranch work until he was effectively Jacob's partner in running the operation. At 19, he married a local girl named Sarah, and they built a small house on the far end of the property so they could stay close to the family while having their own space. Ellie, at 16, showed no interest in marriage despite having several suitors. She wanted to become a teacher, she announced, and Olivia and Jacob supported her ambition, arranging for her to attend a teaching college in Denver. She came home for holidays and summers, bringing with her a sophistication and knowledge that made Olivia proud beyond measure. Jonathan, the baby who was not a baby anymore at 9 years old, was quieter than his siblings but deeply thoughtful. He loved reading and learning, and Olivia suspected he might become a scholar of some kind when he grew up. He had a special bond with his father, often accompanying Jacob on his rounds of the ranch and listening intently to everything he was taught. In 1900, James and Sarah had their first child, a daughter they named Olivia after her grandmother. Holding her tiny namesake, Olivia was struck by how much had changed since that day on the prairie 18 years earlier. She had been alone and terrified then, with no identity and no future. Now she was surrounded by family, respected in the community, secure in who she was and where she belonged. Jacob, now 52, had slowed down a bit, letting James handle more of the physical labor while he focused on the business side of the ranch. But he was still vital and engaged, still the man Olivia had fallen in love with all those years ago. His hair was more gray than black now, and there were deep lines around his eyes, but to her, he was as handsome as ever. One night, lying in bed together after a long day, Jacob turned to Olivia and took her hand. "I have been thinking," he said. "We should make sure everything is in order, legally speaking. The ranch should go to James when I am gone, with provisions for Ellie and Jonathan as well, and I want to make sure you are taken care of no matter what." Olivia squeezed his hand. "You are not planning on going anywhere, are you?" "Not if I can help it," Jacob said with a smile. "But we are not young anymore, and it is wise to plan. I want to make sure our children and grandchildren are secure." They went to a lawyer in Denver and drew up proper wills and legal documents, ensuring that everything Jacob and Olivia had built together would pass smoothly to the next generation. It was a sobering process, confronting their own mortality, but also comforting to know that their legacy would continue. Ellie finished her teaching college and returned to the area, taking a position at the school in a small town about 10 miles from the ranch. She boarded with a family during the week and came home on weekends, full of stories about her students and the challenges of teaching. She was good at it, Olivia could tell, and found real satisfaction in the work. Jonathan, at 12, announced that he wanted to become a veterinarian, inspired by watching his father care for sick and injured animals over the years. It was an ambitious goal, requiring years of education, but Olivia and Jacob promised to support him in whatever way they could. In 1903, James and Sarah had a son, naming him Jacob after his grandfather. The elder Jacob was thrilled, spending hours with his young grandson just as he had with his own children. Watching him cradle the baby, Olivia was transported back to those early days when James had been the infant and Jacob the nervous new father. How far they had come since then. Life was good, full of the kind of everyday joys and challenges that made up a well-lived life. There were hard moments too, of course. They lost cattle to disease one year, struggled through a particularly brutal winter another year, mourned when friends and neighbors passed away. But they faced everything together, their bond as strong as ever. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1902, Jacob surprised Olivia by taking her on a trip to Denver for a weekend. They stayed in a hotel, attended a theater performance, and dined in a fine restaurant, enjoying the novelty of being alone together without the demands of the ranch and family. 20 years, Jacob said as they danced together in the hotel ballroom, moving slowly to the music. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I found you on that prairie. Other times, it feels like you have always been with me. I choose to believe I have always been with you, Olivia said, resting her head on his shoulder. Whatever life I had before does not count. My real life began the day you found me and gave me a name. Olivia, Jacob murmured, saying her name like a prayer. My Olivia. I love you more today than I did 20 years ago, and I will love you even more tomorrow. They renewed their vows privately in their hotel room that night, speaking promises to each other that needed no witnesses. It was a reaffirmation of everything they had built together, a celebration of the love that had sustained them through 2 decades of marriage. The years continued to pass, bringing new grandchildren and new joys. Ellie married a fellow teacher named Robert when she was 24, and they had 2 sons in quick succession. Jonathan went off to college to pursue his dream of becoming a veterinarian, writing long letters home about his studies and his experiences in the wider world. Jacob's health began to decline gradually when he was in his late 50s. Nothing dramatic, just a slowing down, a loss of energy that worried Olivia even as Jacob insisted he was fine. But he was still happy, still engaged with his family and the ranch, still deeply in love with his wife. On a warm evening in June of 1910, when Olivia was 52 and Jacob was 62, they sat on the porch as they had done countless times before. The sun was setting, painting the sky in familiar shades of gold and crimson, and from inside the house, they could hear the sounds of their family gathering for Sunday dinner. James and Sarah with their 3 children, Ellie and Robert with their 2 boys, Jonathan home from school for the summer. The house was full of love and laughter. "This is what I always wanted," Jacob said quietly, his hand finding Olivia's. "A full house, a thriving ranch, children and grandchildren who love each other. But most of all, I wanted you, and I got you against all odds. I found you when you had nothing, and you gave me everything." Olivia leaned against his shoulder, tears pricking her eyes. "You gave me everything too. A life worth living, a love worth having, a family to call my own. I was lost, and you found me. You gave me a name and a home and a reason to wake up every morning grateful." They sat together in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon, and the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Inside, someone called them to dinner, but they took one more moment just for themselves, savoring the peace and the love and the life they had built together from nothing. Over the next years, they watched their grandchildren grow and their children become grandparents themselves. Jacob's health continued to decline slowly, but he remained sharp and engaged, taking joy in every moment with his family. Olivia stayed strong and healthy, though her dark hair turned silver and lines deepened around her eyes. They talked sometimes about that day on the prairie, about the miracle of their meeting and the life that had grown from it. Olivia's memories of her life before remained fragmented and distant, like something that had happened to someone else. And in a way, it had. That frightened, abused woman named Ophelia was gone, transformed into Olivia Anderson, beloved wife and mother and grandmother. In the spring of 1915, when Jacob was 67 and beginning to struggle with a weak heart, he and Olivia took one final ride together out to the place where he had found her 33 years earlier. The prairie looked much the same, endless grass rippling in the wind, sky vast and blue overhead. They dismounted and stood together, Jacob's arm around Olivia's waist, looking at the spot where her new life had begun. "I wish I could have known then what I know now," Jacob said. "That finding you that day was finding my whole future, that the frightened woman I gave a name to would become the center of my entire world. We both got more than we could have imagined," Olivia said, leaning into him. "You were looking for stray cattle and you found me instead. The best accident that ever happened." "Not an accident," Jacob said firmly. "Fate, destiny, providence, whatever you want to call it. We were meant to find each other, Olivia. I believe that with everything in me." They stood there for a long time, remembering and honoring the journey they had taken together. Then they rode back to the ranch, to the house full of family and love, to the life they had built one day at a time over more than 3 decades. Jacob lived for another 5 years, his health gradually failing but his spirit remaining strong. He died peacefully in his sleep in the fall of 1920, with Olivia holding his hand and their children gathered around his bed. He was 72 years old and had lived a good life, full of love and purpose and family. Olivia mourned him deeply, but not hopelessly. She knew she had been blessed beyond measure to have had him for as long as she did, to have built such a beautiful life together. She lived for another 15 years after his death, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the beloved matriarch of a large and loving family. She told the story of how she and Jacob had met to anyone who would listen, never tiring of recounting the miracle of that day on the prairie. "I woke up knowing nothing," she would say, "and the cowboy who found me gave me a name and a home. But more than that, he gave me love and a life worth living. Everything good that came after started with Jacob Anderson finding me that day." When Olivia died peacefully in her sleep in 1935 at the age of 77, she was buried next to Jacob on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to honor her memory, sharing stories of her strength and kindness and the enduring love she had shared with Jacob. The ranch continued to thrive, passed down through generations of Andersons, each one carrying forward the legacy of hard work and love that Jacob and Olivia had established. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as a reminder that sometimes the greatest blessings come from the most unlikely circumstances. In the end, Olivia Winters Anderson's life was defined not by what she had lost when she woke on that prairie knowing nothing, but by what she had gained when Jacob Anderson gave her a name and a home. She had been lost, and she had been found, and in that finding, both she and Jacob had discovered a love that transcended memory, circumstance, and time itself. It was a love that built a family, sustained a ranch, and created a legacy that would endure for generations to come. And it all began with a cowboy riding out to check on stray cattle, and finding instead the woman who would become his whole world, standing alone and afraid on the endless prairie, waiting to be given not just a name, but a reason to live.